Hello and welcome to episode 3 of our live stream today. And thank you for ever so much for everybody joining. We already have someone who commented earlier before the live stream, Ayobon, so saying hey, so welcome. Thank you ever so much for joining. And please let me know, please place in the comments below any let me know where you're tuning in from, what sort of teaching you're doing, whether it's English, Spanish, French, or whatever language. And also uh, say hello. It'd be great to hear from you. But thank you ever so much for everybody joining today. And today we have a special guest who's decided to join and share their experience, I suppose, with teaching on Preply and that sort of thing. So I'm going to bring in Sergey. And so, hello, Sergey. Welcome.
Hello, Martin. Hello, everybody. Thank you for having me.
Right. Well, thank you ever so much for joining today.
Pleasure.
It's great to chat with you. We've messaged in the on Facebook
Indeed, we have.
privately. So thanks for agreeing to join today. Right. Well, a couple of things. Let's get started, and maybe just to remind everyone to don't forget to post your questions in the comments. It'll be great to have your questions, either questions for Sergey, questions for myself, or questions in general, I guess. So let's get started then, and then perhaps maybe could you tell me a bit more about yourself and how you got into teaching on Preply at all, Sergey?
Absolutely. So I've been teaching for quite a while, but I'd say the sort of Preply experience started, much like with everyone else, during the pandemic. So sort of halfway into the pandemic, I was teaching online before, but not to that extent, and I wasn't aware of Preply at the time. So all the students that I had that were sort of remote, we used Skype or other platforms. And a friend of mine, a very good friend of mine, who's also a teacher on Preply, recommended Preply, and I said, well, I can give it a try. I was a little bit apprehensive. I wasn't sure what to expect. So it was a very new experience, with the classroom and everything. And luckily enough, it worked out really, really well in the end. I made a profile, and I wasn't expecting a lot. And shortly after that, I started getting students. And I've been doing it for about a year and a half now, a bit more than a year and a half, and it's been a great experience.
That's great. Well, and could you tell me, are you teaching a particular language? Are you teaching English or another
Yeah, so
language?
I'm mostly teaching English on Preply, although I have taught Spanish and French and a little bit of Greek before, because I kind of come from a little bit of a multilingual background. But nowadays, I mostly teach English because it's my native language and it's the one that I feel most comfortable with. And of course, it's a little bit saturated, of course, as you've said before in your episodes, and there's a lot of teachers, but at the same time there's a lot of students at the same time looking for English teachers. So yeah, and you teach English as well, don't you?
Yes. So I do teach English to a variety of different students. So I ended up much like yourself during the pandemic, going onto online platform to supplement my earnings. A lot of all schools were confined, so it was like all the schools closed, and I ended up at home here teaching remotely. I had some students privately that I taught online, and I had some experience in the past teaching online, predominantly to students in Southeast Asia or China, Taiwan, that area. But now, I'm teaching students from all over the world through Preply.
It's great, isn't it?
It is, yeah. And you have a sort of decision on what you want to do, how you want to teach, the materials that you use. And have you taught before online prior to Preply?
Yeah, so prior to Preply, I did have, so maybe I should put this into context a little bit. So I've lived around, I've traveled quite a bit, and I was teaching in the countries that I was living in. So I lived in Spain for a bit, and in Greece and France. So I always
Mhm.
had students, and when I left those places, a lot of them wanted to continue. Um, so we kind of decided to have online lessons, and again, up till Preply, or just, yeah, around that time, I was a bit apprehensive about this online process because I felt that it
Mhm.
lacked this directness, if you will. Obviously, today I don't have the same opinion. I think it's amazing, but I think it was just about figuring out the logistics, that it just seemed so complicated. So I had done it, mostly with conversational students.
Mm.
So students that wanted more conversational English, it was quite easy. But at the time, I don't think I really knew how I would go about sort of, digging deeper into
Mhm.
anything else. How about yourself? How was it for you?
Well, for me, when I first started on Preply, I actually signed up to Preply well before the pandemic. It was
Mm,
maybe 3 years before the pandemic hit, and my account had just been lying inactive for some
mm,
time. It just been sitting there, and I never really got round to setting up my profile or my account. And then, once the pandemic hit, I was here at home just sitting, and I thought, well, oh yeah, I set up an account with Preply. Let's see how
let's
it
give it a
goes.
go. Yeah,
I've got nothing else to do.
of course.
So I
We
I
had a
ended
lot
up,
of free time back then, didn't
yes.
we?
We did, and
Mm,
I ended up, setting up the account, and then I had to record a introduction video, which I'd
mm,
done in a day.
mm.
I then decided, okay, I've got to set up my profile, and there's a sort of process where you had to identify yourself. They had a
Oh
particular
yes, I
app, and you had
remember.
to check
Mm,
on your passport and see if
yeah.
it's you, and which seems a long time ago now.
Yes.
But once my account was verified, then and they verified all my documentation, it took about 3 days before I got my first student, and I thought, "Oh wow, that's a
That's
surprise." I
quite
never,
easy. Hmm.
yeah, and then I got more and more students. But I suppose the disadvantage with Preply, and something that I watched recently, was the trial lessons being unpaid.
Oh, yeah. The hot topic.
The
Hmm.
hot topic.
Yeah.
And so for my first week, I had all these trial lessons, but I wasn't
Mm.
getting paid for anything. Um, but then as time went on, um, my regular lessons kind of outweighed the sort of trial lessons. So there was more regular lessons occurring and less trial lessons occurring, where it's the other way around when I first started.
Mm, yes.
So it was quite um, disheartening to not get paid for my hours. I've been teaching 6 hours, 7 hours of trial lessons, and I thought, oh, not got paid yet.
Were
Yeah.
you aware of it at first, or did you think that trial lessons were paid?
No, I was aware of
Mm,
it,
mm.
but it doesn't change the
Make
fact
it
that
any
they're
easier.
unpaid.
Mm,
Eh? But yeah.
of course.
Now, I got a comment here from Patricia, who's tuning in on Facebook, and she says, I haven't tried Preply. I've been reluctant to sign up because too many teachers on that platform. Uh, the experience sounds motivating. Our experience, I suppose. What
Mm.
advice would you have for Patricia if she was setting up her profile today?
Well, like I said at first, I mean, it depends what language as well and what kind of demand there is. It can seem quite daunting to know that there's so many tutors
Mm,
signed up. But I think what is really important to keep in mind is that essentially there's room enough for everyone. And as long as you've got, I think the best thing would be to sort of try and find your niche and develop that. So what are you really good at? Why do you want to do this? And how can you sort of specialize in one area rather than do a little bit of everything, which sort of what can make you stand out? What are your unique selling points, so to
Mhm.
speak. What is it that differentiates you from everybody else? And for some people, it could be, they've got maybe a business background, so they can focus on business English, or a medical background, or, whatever. So I think that's really important. Any kind of skill that could sort of help you stand out, because it is difficult, isn't it, to stand out these days?
It certainly is, yes. The way I look at it is a sort of a bell curve in a way, and the majority of teachers on Preply focus, or focus on general English or conversational
Mm,
English, and then at the other spectrums of English, I guess it will be more the niche, as you recommended, specializing in business English, medical English, or that sort of thing. I think for me, when I first started, I was I was quite lucky because I said, okay, I had some examining background in before. I
mm,
worked for
mm,
Cambridge as an examiner.
mhm.
I don't now, but it
But
was
you've got the
worth
experience, which is really
exactly.
useful.
And then I thought, okay, well, let's look at exam preparation. And it was something which kind of felt natural because before I was teaching on Preply, I've been teaching privately to help
Mhm,
students with their IELTS preparation. And
mm.
it was just a nice way to go from one aspect to another platform. Yeah. So what sort of specialization have you focused on when it comes down to Preply itself?
So when I first started, I was a bit kind of like a jack of all trades, so a little bit of conversational English and general English and then business English, because I do have a business English background as well.
Hmm.
I've worked in marketing and retail, so I've helped students with presentations and
Hmm.
sort of writing emails and those sorts of things. And then with regards to exam preparation, I have helped quite a lot of students with that, but I would say my sort of main niche would be business English. I've been doing a lot of sort of IB,
Hmm.
IGCSEs over the last year, and it's something that I personally find quite interesting, and just getting back into the whole, literature and those sorts of things. Very demanding, of course. And then, of course, you've got the occasional student who wants a bit of, maybe conversational English or
Hmm.
something more general, which is quite easy. But I would say sort of narrowing it down, and then the students also let you know what it is that they're looking for, because sometimes they come to you saying, I need this, this, and that, and it turns out, all they want is more of a conversation, because you might
Hmm.
prepare a lot of things, and they sort of, it's a bit too much for them, and they're just like, can we practice our speaking? I'm just, I think
Hmm.
that's also something that is really important. I'm sure it will come up later on in the discussion, but sort of adaptability, being able to adapt to their needs. I think it's
Hmm.
really, really important as a tutor, don't you think?
Yeah, I completely agree. I was chatting with the tutor last week, during
Mm,
the live stream, and she was talking
mm,
about um, you know um, preparing lessons, catering for the student. So, you may have a number of different students that you're teaching through the week, but trying to focus on that each individual student is so important. Otherwise, you would end up just delivering the same old lesson again, not really,
recycling the same things, yeah.
yeah, so not really catering for that particular student and their needs or their expectations. Yeah.
Absolutely, absolutely. I think it's so important, and what I always tell my students from the beginning, the trial lessons is,
Mm,
I don't have a one size fits all approach. There are a lot of tutors like that, and
mm,
that's fine. But for me, it's really important to tailor the lessons,
mm,
and I think that's what kind of secures students who stay with you for quite a
mhm,
long time. Obviously, we do have students who are here for a short time. Maybe they want some exam preparation,
mhm,
then they move on to something else. But those who really stay are the ones that feel like you're giving them the attention that they deserve.
mhm,
Um, and it sort of goes beyond this idea of just using prepping materials or just going through the motions. It needs to be
Yes,
personalized for sure.
it does. Well, let's roll back a little bit. We've discussed Preply quite a bit, and you've introduced yourself a little bit. I'm just wondering the sort of training that you've had as a teacher,
Mm.
and the sort of recommendations that you have when it comes down to becoming an online teacher, I suppose we'll call it now, or a tutor on Preply. What's your background into tutoring, and what sort of advice would you have for people who are attempting to enter this market?
Yeah, I think that's a very good question. A lot of people think it's very easy. Anyone can be a tutor. So that is definitely that is not true. It's not that easy. A lot of work goes into it. Um, So, I mean, my academic background has always been languages. So I've studied modern languages and translation. I've done a master's in translation. So all
Mhm.
sorts of different languages, mostly Spanish and French, and Greek as well, because I'm half Greek actually.
Mhm.
Um, and so
Well,
I
all English comes from Greek, I suppose, or it's all
yes,
Greek to me.
yes. Exactly. And I got into tutoring during my first year at university because at the time I wanted to be independent financially. I didn't want to keep asking my parents for money and help because they were generous enough to help me with my studies. So I wanted to sort of take that burden off their shoulder, and I wasn't sure what I would do. So I had some friends at university who were non-native speakers of English, and they needed help with
Mhm.
their English, with their assignments, and sort of understanding and communicating and just improving their skills. So I kind of got into it at the time. So we're talking about more than 10 years ago now, while I was, yeah, during my first year at university. And very quickly, I decided I wasn't sure if I would like it, but very quickly, I sort of discovered that it was a really enjoyable process. I had this natural sort of ability to explain things. And more than that, I actually enjoyed seeing them sort of getting it and
Mhm.
and 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 feeling as if I'm helping them progress. So then it was sort of a word of mouth thing because one person told the other, and I ended up having
Mhm.
quite a lot of students part time. All of them wanted sort of, either help with expression or how to write academically, in a
Mhm.
more academic fashion and that sort of thing. So I continued doing that, and then I went off and did a master's in translation and interpreting, which was very, very demanding and quite stressful because you need to use your brain a lot.
Yeah. My
And
wife had done MA and a PhD in
mm,
translation as well, so it's very a very, very demanding subject itself.
it's really nice in terms of it's a very creative process, especially
Mhm.
translation. So for me, the ideal kind of projects to do is, sort of literary translation and
Mhm.
those sorts of things, ideally. Although most of the time, we translators end up translating, because I still do it on a freelance basis, sort of like
Mhm.
refrigerator manuals and that sort of thing. Just not as interesting. But yeah, there's a lot you can do.
Mhm.
And I think it's sort of we kind of delved deeper into the whole process and language, and there was a lot
Mhm.
of linguistics there. So I continued teaching. Again, most of the time it was non-native speakers, and because I was always part of like these super international groups when I was younger, like from all over the world. I was
Mm.
familiar with different cultures and how they perceive things and how to
Mhm.
explain things, how they think. A lot of the time, I spoke their languages, so
Mhm.
it really gives you that advantage to help them understand the structure of
Mhm.
compare English to their language, and
Mhm.
when they're translating from their language and that sort of thing, right?
Yes, with their frames of reference and
Yes.
what have you, it doesn't necessarily cross the border, does it? When they have
Mm.
a term of reference in their
Indeed.
first language to compare to English.
Indeed, indeed. And just to finish up, because I don't want to go on forever,
Sure.
I then did another master's in performing and sort of voice and acting and that sort of thing, which um, I found a really, really interesting. I found it interesting as an experience, not only because I was really into performing at the time, but the things that I took
Mm,
from those years, I would say, sort of the use of voice. And I do a bit of accent work with some students who want to neutralize their accent, sort of more standard English or standard American RP. We work on those sorts of things,
mhm,
projection,
mhm,
and public speaking, the confidence to present yourself and talk
mm,
and all these things. So again, depending on what the student wants, you can really sort of I don't know, dig into your little bag of goodies, whatever you've
mhm.
accumulated during your academic years and your experience, and try to cater to that, I guess. I don't know if
Mm.
I've answered your question, but I think,
Yeah, no, you've answered a part, I suppose, part of it. I suppose,
mm,
and I guess I'm repeating the question again in
mm,
retrospect, but you've kind of just explained your um, entry into tutoring
mm,
from your academic years, and I guess uh, as someone for someone who wants to get into tutoring online. And they have no experience of tutoring,
mm,
or they
mm,
have no certification or
yes.
course. What would be a recommendation for them?
All right. So I think there are a few things that anyone can do. Obviously, it depends on what they're willing to do, what their budget is, what their time sort of allows them to. But for instance, someone who's joining Preply, um, other than being really enthusiastic about teaching, which I think is a must, I would say there are all sorts of resources. So familiarize yourself with all the Preply materials to the best of your ability. Preply
Mhm.
actually offers this course now, which I don't know if you've done it, teaching course.
Yeah, let me have a look. I'll have a Google,
Hmm.
and then try and bring it on screen. But yeah, they do have some form of course, don't they?
Yeah, they've
Like,
got they've got this course, and then at the end you can get a diploma, and it's actually really really interesting because it's got a lot of elements. So it takes a while to complete and to sort of
mm,
do it properly, and it's definitely a good start for anyone who might not have any other qualifications.
yes, yes, that's true. Well, I'm just having a quick look, and I haven't done this course myself because my entry into teaching was very much the approach of doing. I was kind of pushed into the deep end. I traveled a lot in my early years, and I've already lived in 6 countries, so I've been
Mm,
very fortunate to have lived in many different countries
mm,
and
mm,
experienced different cultures as well. And I was kind of I found myself teaching English when I graduated from university in international business, and I moved to South Korea. And the only thing
mm.
that
Wow,
people could do was to teach English, and
of
I had
course.
no course. I had no course completed by then. I was
Mm,
literally teaching myself how to teach at that time,
mm.
and then I pursued a certificate like a CELTA course,
Yes.
the Cambridge CELTA,
Mm,
or there's the Trinity Cert TESOL. And then I came back to the UK, done my MA, done a diploma, done a young learner certificate, and then,
yes.
you know,
You got quite a few, I think, if I remember
yeah.
correctly. You've got quite a few qualifications.
So, yeah, the Preply certificate or the Preply course, yeah, I suppose there's nothing that I can't be taught again
Mm.
from my previous experience, I
Or
guess.
just to
So,
refresh, I guess,
yeah,
because you probably covered it
yeah.
already.
So let me have a quick look at.
Mm.
I'm currently looking online for this Preply course, and shame I didn't get it. So free Preply teaching. free- Yeah. I should have got the link before I went live, really, to be honest.
You know what? I had it somewhere in my emails, but I get so many emails every day that it's.
That's true. Well, let's move on whilst I'm having a look at my emails and
Absolutely.
online. Maybe the next point is maybe the most difficult challenge you faced teaching online or on Preply. Any thoughts on that?
So for the most part, it's been a great experience. I haven't faced a lot of challenges, other than the sort of normal challenges that come with this job. There is the occasional audio and video malfunctioning, which we all experience. Perhaps I would say one of the things that throw me off track a little bit at times. I've gotten better at it, but it's when the students are not very clear about what their expectations and their objectives are. So, for instance, you start with a student, and they sort of tell you that they've got a beginner's level or intermediate level, and then all of a sudden, it's happened to me to have a student tell me, oh, in 2 weeks, by the way, I'm doing an IELTS.
Yes.
And that is extremely stressful for the tutor, because I think we do have a responsibility. But at the same time, when the time frame is so limited, I always try and make sure that I explain to them that, if I think it's doable, okay, but most of the time it's a bit of a stretch, especially if they want to have like 1 or 2 lessons a week, and the deadline is, or the exam or whatever is I don't know, 2 weeks from now. It's not enough. So yeah, I think when the expectations and the objectives are not very clear, that is something that I find challenging. It's not a challenge that we can't take on, but I think it's a little bit stressful, to say the least. Have you had any experiences like that?
Yeah, I suppose it depends on the particular cultures or excuse me, particular cultures that you're dealing with, or students from certain countries or nationalities, where certain nationalities may have this sort of relaxed form of time, and they say, "Oh well, my IELTS test is not until 2 months' time, so I'll find a teacher soon," and they'll leave it and leave it and leave it until maybe 2 weeks before the exam. And go, "Oh, yes, I forgot. I need a lesson just to polish my IELTS preparation off."
Yeah.
And I have had it. Some Turkish students have kind of left it till the last month to prepare. I've had some students from other countries leave it for a couple of weeks, and you can't work wonders in such a short period of time.
Yeah.
And so for me, it's kind of difficult to try and well, you can help as much as possible within the constraints of the time that you're given. And
Absolutely.
I've funnily enough, I've got a student that's starting next week for IELTS preparation, and she needs to do an IELTS and get a certain grade so she can come to the UK and work as a doctor. And she's got a bit of time, a couple of months in preparation. And she's already from the outset saying, I need the IELTS, I need this certain grade, I need to try and achieve this, and which is really helpful. And I think the challenge that we encounter is when the students just book a lesson, but there's no communication from their
Oh
side,
yes.
and there's very little you can do to plan or prepare.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely, and sometimes you have the I like to call them the one-off students who just want one lesson for something, and they
Yeah.
expect to do everything in the trial lesson, which is
Mhm.
why I mean, I've been quite fortunate, but it has happened. So
Mm.
that's why I would say it's very useful to always send them a message in advance and say
Mhm.
that our first lesson is mostly an opportunity for us to get to know each other and to talk about your objectives. Of course, there are teachers who like to teach a little bit, and I think that's absolutely fine. I know you like to teach a little bit.
A little bit, yeah.
Just to
Like you
give them a
said,
taster.
yeah, to give them a bit of a taste and go, okay, well, I'll book the lesson. Yes, there's particular students who maybe go from one trial to another, just trying to improve their English because I don't know if there's a particular discount or opportunity for students on Preply to go through different trials. But yes, for me, my focus, much like yours, is to develop that rapport with the students, try and develop that mutual understanding and appreciation. And so a lot of my time I spend with getting to know the student, their aims, their objectives. I had one student, a female student actually. She was quite a successful business lady, and she wanted interview preparation. And I said, okay, well, we'll have a look at the interview preparation, but let's first get to know each other a little bit more. What's this interview for? What's your job? And so it was trying to get that. And then after the trial, we had interview preparation, sort of questions, how to deal with questions in English and the sort of answers they're expecting. And that was it. That was all she had. So the trial and the first lesson, and then she disappeared because she got the job.
I go about it in the same way, and I have had students like that. So I just say, it's really important for me to know who you are in order to help you and tailor the lessons. Obviously, if it's going to be a sort of short-term thing, yes, then probably, one or two follow-up lessons after that, and then they're on their way, and that's that.
Yes, I suppose that's the drawback with Preply when it comes down to teaching on Preply. It's very precarious, I guess. Well, not very precarious, but slightly precarious because there's this transient period where students come and go, and not all students will stay. They may return back later on. But there's no security, I suppose, in terms of working for yourself in this sense. Yeah. Right. Now we've moved on about like trial lessons or developing trial lessons. So what would be you said you focused on developing the relationship with the student. How would you go about the next lesson? What would make a good second lesson with a student?
So during the trial lesson, I like to take a lot of notes and any sort of information they give me. And it's a process that starts during the trial lesson because I start thinking about what kind of materials I could use. What do I need to create for them, maybe, if they've got specific issues with grammar or something that we're going to need to address. So after I've gone away and thought about all that, then I start thinking about, what do I have already that I can use with them? So, it could be a business English student that really needs to, has a good grasp of the language. They could be a B2, sometimes a C1. How do I challenge them and get them to step out of their comfort zone and give them vocab that is going to be useful for their sort of job? And also, how do I help them acquire it? Because you've got so many different types of learners. You've got people, the students who like to write everything down and, appear to be quite keen. And then you've got others who may appear to be a bit more passive, but that's not necessarily the case. It could be that they're more sort of auditory or visual learners, and they don't need to write things down. So it's a constant assessment. And what I also tell them during the trial lesson is that the first couple of lessons is still kind of an opportunity for us to explore. So it's not set in stone. We'll see where this takes us, and if necessary, we might change our course because it could be that this is too challenging or not challenging enough or not relevant.
That's true. It's quite an interesting point you made about Well, a couple of points. One about challenging the students and getting them out of their comfort zone. And I was watching a video a few weeks ago, and they were this university lecturer in Korea. He was talking about how he gets the students to communicate in English in classes, and you know. Uh, the stereotypical, I hate to use that word, but the normal Korean speaker would not be that confident or comfortable speaking in English. And he says, well, the first thing I would do is to challenge them and get them out of that sort of comfort zone so that they become used to dealing with that sort of stress and pressure in real life. Because when they go on to go into business or whatever experience they encounter, they're going to be placed under pressure, and they'll have to deal with it if they're going to be communicating in English or in their first language. Now, sorry, I'm rambling a little bit.
No, I think it's really important to get people out of their comfort zone, like you're saying, and it is it's a challenge for everyone to find the best way to do that.
The second point you mentioned was about the sort of negotiated learning, I suppose we could call it. So seeing how things fit, testing the water, so to say, seeing if particular activities work or were less successful, and trying to respond to that. And I think successful tutors in that regard try to focus on delivering what's expected, try to respond to how events that occur, change and adapt their teaching, and place the student first, as we've mentioned before. But yeah,
Yeah,
interesting.
absolutely. And if I may just add, all
Sure.
these things are really important, but it's like I said, it's really important to make sure that also the expectations are realistic. I've had students who sort of, they like to give me a bit more input, some of them. So they say, I want lots of vocab and I want to acquire vocab in a short period of time, da da da.
Mhm.
And, in that case, you have to tell them, well, absolutely. But you still need to keep in mind that your results and your sort of progress is dependent on a number of factors like
Mhm.
participation, consistency,
Mhm.
frequency of lessons. So, of course, I'm happy to deliver during class, but then if you're having one lesson every 2 weeks, it
Mm.
might not be as beneficial as it would be
Mhm.
to sort of have more regular lessons.
True. I've got a question here from Patricia,
Mm,
which I'll share in a moment. So thank you for the comment, Patricia. And anyone else who's watching, feel free to add your questions and we'll try and answer them as best as we can.
mhm,
Now, before I add this question, it kind of reminds me, I've had students with this sort of expectation that they'll be able to get an IELTS band 6, 7, or
mm,
8
mm,
within a month or two,
mhm,
and they're already at maybe at A2, B1 level.
mm.
So unrealistic expectations.
Yeah.
And the common question that's asked, particularly from students from the Middle East, is how long will it take me to get to B2,
Mm,
C1? To get a
mm,
band 6 or 7.
mm,
And as diplomatically as I can say, I say, well, much depends on what you do outside the classroom, as well as what you do in the classroom. Um, and I try to remove any opportunity to say you will get to this level in X amount of weeks,
mm.
because they'll hold you back to that. And if they don't get to that
Absolutely.
particular level, they'll say, hang on, 6 weeks ago you said I'll be B2 or C1, but I'm still, A2, maybe B1 now. What's
Yeah, I
that mean?
refrain from giving those estimates as well. I totally get you. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Mm. Yeah.
Well, here's Patricia's question. Do you sometimes use textbooks? If so, what's your favorite one?
Oh, that's a good one. Well, I do use actual books sometimes. I was recently using Anna Karenina with a student, which is not a textbook, obviously, it's literature, but it was
Hmm.
sort of, an actual book, and we were, my student had it as well, so we were
Hmm.
sort of analyzing it and annotating it and going about it in that way. And because I'm a huge I love to read in my free
Hmm.
time, the little free time that I've got. Um, so yeah, but I haven't, other than that, I haven't used a lot of textbooks in quite a while. I've got the odd grammar textbook, but it's always a bit complicated to get it across to the student or to sort of scan it.
Mm.
So I usually, in that case, I create my own materials if I can't find something that is suitable online or on Preply. And a lot of the time, it's not that the materials are not good, but I prefer to structure them in a way that I think are going to be more easily understood by the student.
Hmm. Hmm.
How about yourself? Do you like to use textbooks, Martin?
Well, for me, if it's in person, textbooks are great. They're
Mm,
wonderful resources. You can use or abuse them, I
mm,
suppose.
yeah.
Um, um, for online tutoring, though, I've not really used a textbook apart from when I was delivering a course
Yeah.
remotely online to some students at the institute that I work for
Mm,
at the moment. But if it's online tutoring, private tutoring that I'm doing via Preply, then
mm,
most of it would be personal resources, things that I've developed over time, or I use materials from Lingua House.
mm,
Lingua House is very popular for
yeah.
English material or Spanish material as well. And let me see if I can get this up and share the
Mm.
screen. So bear with me.
I think one of the great things about online teaching is that we have the opportunity to move away from these traditional classroom sort of
Mm,
techniques, and I think that's also what our students are looking for most of the time, because they've all been to school and they've studied
mm,
English and they've done it in a way that isn't always as interesting or as engaging. So
mm,
so that's another thing that I think a lot of us try to deliver in our lessons, to sort of teach them, but at the same time to keep them engaged. And why not have fun in the
hmm.
process? It
Yes.
needn't be the sort of rigid kind of
Hmm.
old school way.
Yes, yes. When I was first starting to get into teaching, there were course books that were available, which are great. Course books are
Mm,
very useful and beneficial. And one was Natural English, it was called.
mm,
um, I've not
yeah.
used that for years since teaching in Korea now.
Mm,
And the other was called Cutting Edge, and Cutting Edge is quite a popular course book
yeah.
for English. And
Yeah. Yeah.
I've used that many times now. Um, uh, but possibly my favorite course book, if I were to choose a favorite course book, I guess, would be to maybe choose English File. And English
Hmm.
File is another old course book, but it's gone through several iterations, different, edits and republications. And the latest version is great. It's a lovely little course book.
Mm. Sounds
Yeah.
good.
So, so thank you for your question, Patricia.
Thank you,
I hope that
Patricia.
I hope that answers your question. So, any other questions that anyone else has, feel free to put in the comments. It would be great to have your questions on board. Okay, right. Oh, and we have another. And yeah, Patricia says I use English File too. So great, another English File user as well. Let's have a look at some of the other questions that I've got here. And one question that I asked last week was,
Mm.
have you met any of your students face to face?
Mm. Yeah, I was actually watching that. I watched that part of your broadcast last week. I haven't. No, I haven't had the fortune of meeting anyone face to face. So yeah, no, it's not something that that I've had the opportunity to do yet. I've always wondered what it would be like. I know that a lot of tutors and teachers meet, and I think it's great. But also, I'm a bit far out, so I'm not in the UK at the moment. So I'm based in Lebanon, so in Beirut. So I'm a little bit off the beaten track. It's not the most popular destination for students at the moment. But I guess I wouldn't be opposed to it. It would be a little bit strange. I know that you haven't either. I mean, at least since last time that I checked.
Yes, that's right. So any students that I've tutored on Preply, I've not met face to face before. I had met one of my students that I tutored at the university. I taught him online, and then he sent me an email saying, "Can we meet?" sort of thing. And I said, "Yeah, of course, why not?" So we met in my hometown, and our paths crossed. And I didn't recognize him initially because you have this sort of
Yes,
technology, the screen, but
absolutely.
it doesn't represent who you are when you see
No.
the person physically, I suppose.
Taller or shorter or whatever.
Yeah,
Yes.
exactly. Yeah. And so we kind of crossed each other, and then I messaged him saying, "I think I saw you, but I'm not sure." And he said the same. And I
Yeah.
said, "Oh yeah, okay, must be the same person then." So, but that's the only time I've actually met someone who I've tutored online, but not with Preply students, I suppose.
Would you have any reservations about meeting students from Preply?
I think so. Yes. I think the reservation is that they know me here. It's my room. It's my home that I'm tutoring on, and that's sort of. I don't know whether it's an old-fashioned view, but teacher student, it's kind of a bit of a strange
Some
setup to meet
boundaries.
privately, and to have that sort of professional boundary, I guess, is good. But if a student were coming to the UK and they were traveling from far away and they said, "Oh, I would really like to meet up," and then I say, "Well, okay, yeah, we can meet up," but again, it would feel a bit weird. I'm not sure. How about you?
I'm with you on that. Yeah, I wouldn't rule it out, but I do have some reservations. I do like to sort of separate, sort of to put some professional boundaries, like you said, and that doesn't mean that you can't be friendly with your students and that you can't develop a meaningful relationship with them. But I do think that there should be some sort of boundaries. I'll revisit it if I cross that bridge. But I think for the time being, yeah.
It's kind of funny because one of the students that I taught face to face last year, I bumped into him in the street last weekend, actually, funny
Oh,
enough. And he still called me teacher, but I say to students, "Don't call me teacher, just call me Martin. That's all right." But anyway, he said, "Oh, teacher, you're here," sort of thing. "Where have you been?" And it was a bit strange meeting a student outside of a
it's
sort
a
of a
little bit
classroom,
surreal. Yeah.
and there was this sort of
Awkwardness.
yeah, exactly,
Yeah.
awkwardness, or sort of like, yeah, how do I function in this situation where he's the student, I'm the teacher, or vice
Yes.
versa? So that was kind of interesting. Right, well, we got a question here from Azar Hassan. So thank you ever so much for joining, Azar. And he says, in terms of challenging students, is it practical to expose to them a streaming podcast style of interviews, especially within themselves? I guess in getting them to be interviewed or recording a sort. I'm not sure, but what's your take from this?
Interesting. Well, it depends on how we would interpret this question, but interviews, especially within themselves. So if it would be sort of like reproducing some kind of situational scenario where you give them the opportunity to talk So we could do a simulation that is going to be, we're going to have a podcast, and let's say the student is really interested in, I don't know, nutrition or something, so they can assume the role of a nutritional expert, and I'm interviewing the student, so we're having sort of make believe podcast, and it's it gives them an opportunity to do that among themselves.
Among themselves, yeah.
Right. So how would that?
I suppose what he means here is maybe, I guess your take is very much what I'm thinking, where you get the students to record their own podcast or that sort of
Yeah.
thing.
I think anything they can do to practice as much as possible their language skills, because don't forget that a lot of these students, they do have quite a good knowledge of grammar and vocab, that sort of thing. But what they lack the most is the opportunity to practice the language on an everyday sort of basis. If they're living in Russia, or they're living in another country where they're not using English. So it really depends on that sort of thing. I think most students, that I don't think there's a student who doesn't benefit from at least a portion of the class being dedicated to conversation and just working on those skills. And a lot of Middle Eastern students that I teach want that, and they have quite a good knowledge of English, but they don't often necessarily get to use it beyond a specific sort of context.
Yes. I think it's quite nice. I think this sort of project that you could have with students is great for maybe maybe adolescent learners, maybe adults, something which is kind of different to the chalk and talk style of teaching. I'm a great believer that project work for young learners is more beneficial than maybe the grammar style, the traditional
Yeah.
style of lesson. I one project that I used to do at a language school was to get these were Colombian students to go through a very old Victorian Georgian style property. Which was owned by a duke in this part of the country. So it's very grand, very big building, and they would go and introduce the house or do a tour of the property, and interview teachers and staff at the school. And I would put all their video together and combine it, and then they would present or share it with all the staff at the school, and then they'd be able to share that video with their parents who have sent them off around the world to the UK to learn English, and there's something tangible there after their learn. I think any sort of project which is creative, whether it's recording a video or recording a podcast, it can be so beneficial, and you don't really need a lot of tech nowadays, because you've got a phone, you could record on your phone or student's phone, you can put it all together, and they can continue this sort of weekly podcast, monthly podcast, or whatever you want to do with it.
Indeed, and anything that helps them to engage, to stay engaged. I think especially with younger learners, because it's you need to keep their attention. Their minds tend to wander off quite easily. I'd say that would be one of the most challenging things for me personally, sort of younger learners, which I haven't had a lot on Preply, but yeah.
Well, this leads on to Patricia's question. Have you ever, any of you, taught very young learners online? I'm curious.
So not very young learners online, because I do state on my profile that I mostly teach adults. So I put this disclaimer and I say anyone below the age of 18, please get in touch with me before, because it doesn't mean that I'm not willing to teach you, but I need to know what your requirements are, what your situation is, etc. So I have taught quite a lot of teenagers successfully. I think that's absolutely fine. But younger ages, I prefer not to, and I prefer not to do it online. If it were live, I think it's different because you can sort of create a better connection and bond with the student. I think it's something that I have yet to master. What about you?
Yeah, well, I decided New Year resolution to follow us. I was following a similar principle to you last
Mm,
year. New Year 2023. Okay,
mm,
I'm going to challenge myself. I'll put myself out my comfort zone. So
mm,
if there is a young learner that signs up for a lesson,
mm.
yeah, I'm going to do it. Let's see how things go. Because what's the worst that could happen?
Yeah, yeah, of course, of course. It's not the
um,
end of the world.
no.
It's probably going to. You never know what it could lead to as well. You know.
Mm. And so I was my first two students, and again, very limited conversation from the parents or
Mm,
carers for these children. I was expecting an adult student to turn up, and I had
mm,
two twins that turned
mm,
up, Middle Eastern from the UAE. And I was chatting to them, and I thought, oh, their English is very good. Oh, that's interesting. And it
mm.
turned out they were at a trilingual school studying
Trilingual. So they
uh,
spoke French as well, didn't they?
French,
Mm,
Arabic, English,
yeah.
and then I realized, oh, they're being brought up in a very multilingual
Mm,
environment, and what I had planned for an adult student was thrown out the window immediately, and
yeah.
I had to come up with something on the cuff, just to deliver to these pairs of students.
And that's
That
the
was
other
it.
thing. You need to be able to think on your feet really fast
Mm,
because sometimes you don't know what you're going to get, or you don't know, the student
mm,
might just say, "Oh, by the way, I've got an interview tomorrow, whatever, a regular student. Can we focus on
yeah.
that?" So it's really important, when it's possible, to just be
Hmm.
ready to adapt to that.
Of
I
course.
can't stress that enough. I think it's really, really important.
Yeah, responsiveness. I think any teacher is able to respond very quickly, or you get used to responding very quickly.
Yeah, there need to
N-
be limits, and it needs to
mhm,
be done within a realistic frame. But I think
sure.
having that willingness is definitely important.
Now, the two kids that I was teaching, I suppose they were 8 years old.
Mm,
Um, bit more experience, life experience, or a cultural experience. So they're
mm,
slightly older than their age, I guess,
mm,
more mature
mm.
than their age.
More mature, yeah.
The other kids that I've started teaching, two 7-year-old French twins, again, twins.
Oh,
Um,
twins.
yeah, and they speak French, Chinese, and they're learning English as well. So it's
And how do you
kind of
find
interesting.
it? Do you find the process challenging in terms of their level of English? Do you feel that with these sorts of students, you kind of need to make sure that they're stimulated enough and sort of
Mm.
engaged?
I find it challenging in terms of stimulation or
Mm,
engagement. Um, or you could, if you're wanting to try and engage them or entertain them, that there's that edutainment principle. And I don't necessarily want to go through that route. I want to try
mm,
and teach them something that they could learn more about.
mm,
So if it's like a CLIL, I think it's called CLIL, content language
mm.
integrated learning. So they
Integrated
learn about
learning.
a topic or an aspect about baseball or Ramadan, something that's happening in the world,
Of
something that
course.
they'd learn in their own class in their
Mm,
first language, but they learn it in English.
mm,
That that's what I would prefer to focus on.
mm.
But yeah, again, that sort of engagement. Sometimes they lose engagement or they get distracted quite easily.
Just
But
need
you,
to adapt again, don't you?
mm,
Because I've had students who might not be that young, but they
mm,
kind of give you clues. So, for instance, let's say you're doing a reading activity, and they're like, "Oh, are we going to do this now?" And
mm,
that's their way of saying, you know, okay, can we do something else? So you need to be able to read these clues and adapt, and then be like, okay, so tell me, what are you going to do this weekend? And then their face lights up, and you can see them. So it really is about reading these signals and catering to that.
Yeah. Well, I'm afraid we've reached the end. We have one more question from Patricia. How do you deal with shy students who are unwilling to speak? Any last minute advice for her?
And are not willing to. Okay, yeah, they're not willing to speak much. I think again, it's about getting them out of their comfort zone, trying to make them feel comfortable. It's really important to stress that the classroom is a safe place, so they're not going to be judged. It's their opportunity to make mistakes, because that's how they're going to learn. So a lot of speakers don't want to make mistakes, but they really should, and they should sort of, it's not the end of the world, and at the end of the day, they can reset the exam. Or I think our job is to just make them feel as comfortable as possible, and
Yeah.
to give them these tools, and they need to believe in themselves as well.
Yeah, I agree. I think accepting the mistakes that will occur when you're teaching or when you're speaking a foreign language. It's like, I'm going to make mistakes. I don't mind. I'm going to try and communicate, but then I'll learn from it. And I think that's so important. And for students to have an environment where they are able to make mistakes and
Yeah. I mean,
feel
then we
secure.
kind of go into a completely different thing of like, do you correct them on the spot, or do which is a completely different conversation. I think one can have a podcast just for that.
That's true.
But, we have to make these judgment calls as well. But I think anything at first that is going to help them with their fluency. So maybe just let them get used to talking and reassure them as much as possible. Would really do the trick, and then you can focus on finessing the linguistic parts, the
Sure.
vocab and grammar and all that.
Right. Well, I'm going to end it there because I've got things to do. But it's been a pleasure to have you on, Sergey, and thank you ever so much
Indeed,
for joining.
likewise. Thank you very
Um,
much for having me, Martin.
you're very welcome, and it's been great chatting with you. And
I look
also,
forward to the future podcasts.
And I'm getting quite a few comments from people who have joined. So thank you, Martin and Sergey. So thank you, Patricia. Jasmita's just joined, I assume. Yeah, and I suppose this hesitancy or this unwillingness to communicate can kind of linger within an online environment, I suppose.
It's
But
natural.
also, yeah, it's natural. And as Hassan says, thank you very much for your time. I love to have a different perspective of teaching, as I'm a trainer that's more focused on adult and skill-based learning, and that again, that's a. I hopefully you can kind of connect with some of the aspects that we were talking today. But
Thanks to everyone.
yeah, thank you ever so much. So, as everybody knows, a live stream every Saturday at 1 p.m. UK time. But next week, or tomorrow, actually, the clocks are going back 1 hour in the UK.
Yeah.
So it will be at a slightly, sorry, are they going back or forward?
They're going forward.
Forward. Yeah,
Forward,
so
yes.
it'll be at a slightly earlier time than what others may expect in certain parts of the country.
Oh, right, yes. But it's always 1 o'clock for you in the UK.
Yes,
right?
yes. So, for example, in Korea, the clocks neither go back or
They
forth.
don't. Yes, indeed, they don't. Yeah, so
Yeah.
that's a bit of a nightmare when this happens. Absolutely.
So, thank you ever so much for everybody joining. Thank you again to Sergey for agreeing to join.
you,
It was
Martin.
wonderful to have you and to put the world to right, I suppose.
Thank you so much.
And I'll see everybody next Saturday at a slightly earlier time, but 1 p.m. UK time. So take care all. Stay safe. Thank you and bye-bye.